So without further ado, I'm going to hand the floor to Dr. Yengde, and we look forward to his comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for that extremely warm introduction, and thank you for inviting me to Fletcher. It would have just taken a ride from Harvard to the next station, and I would have been there. Nevertheless, I'm so happy to be with the neighbors. Before I start this conversation, let me acknowledge also my dear friend Anubhav, who made the introductions and ensure that I come, and also this gave me an opportunity to perhaps also share some of my research, and also perhaps invite more comments about on the progress of my work. Um, the title, the subtext of that is creating Dalit-Black Archives. And I think I would like to, as intellectual project, I would like to focus on that to begin with, and then how that kind of leads us to how we tackle, address the socio-economic disparities that the Brahminical and white supremacist structures, which remain the foundation of two important societies, also democracies, leading democracies of our times, India and the United States. Before we begin, let's also perhaps take into consideration what caste means in the Indian context, and also what caste means in the US context, because caste has been with the US for so long as since the slavery, but also after the abolition of slavery, caste as a phenomenon becomes central to much of the thought and debate within the North American North, especially the abolitionists who very much uplift, and very much in Boston area, who are theorizing the post-antebellum within the conduits of caste, because to totally or to make sense of how caste functions in these societies, especially the slave society, there has been an academic and as well as sociological inquiry into the system. And one of the earliest works in 1847, we have a record which was obviously published by Reverend Joseph Robert, who published a book, Caste Opposed to Christianity. And it was a text written, of course, in the midst of all of the happenings here in America, but this text brought out the perspective of a Hindu who converted to Christianity, and his views of converting to Christianity, where he literally brings out the central thesis of Hinduism, which being a caste system. He calls out the distinctions that the caste system gave, and very much in the spirits of identifying how caste is a demoralizing influence, where in that he of course talks about it remains as a pride when one person thinks of himself more highly than he might think of other. So the idea that if I am higher, that means I have gained a status of superior, and superiority meant holier, meant closer to the enlightenment, closer to the godliness. And this didn't really sit well with it, and especially when there was, of course, a devotion to idolatry, where, of course, that idolatry meant worshipping stones, but denigrating humans. And so this is a testament, and of course, Reverend Joseph Robert brings out that perspective. Now, around that same time, when this text has been written, we have to think about empire, which very much has strong hold on much, if not most, but much part of intellectual production in various metropoles. And within the empire, around this time itself, the British colonial ethnography is also describing caste, is also reporting on how caste operates. And when they are describing the testimonials of caste as an oppressive system, but also as an intrinsic part of Hindu order, the text is then, of course, getting translated. Max Muller, one of the leading Sanskritists who comes to London, and there is a whole corpus where the translation of the Sanskrit texts undergo. Now, those influences are very much in the Anglo world, and America is very much part of the Anglo world, especially colonial America. And due to that impact, what happens is mostly the northeastern abolitionists kind of draw on that analogy. And one of the most powerful statement given, especially 4 years after abolition of slavery, was by the radical Republican senator in the state house of Massachusetts, Charles Sumner. Now, Sumner, being Sumner, of course, anti-fugitive law, asking to franchise the free slaves. This is basically one of the radical steps Sumner is proposing when the entire corpus is against all of that. And not only that, Sumner even is asking to not only eradicate the slavery as a form of bondage, but also slavery in the form of socio-economic life. And to describe that, he deploys the term caste. And he delivers his famous lecture. And during those times, lectures were default interrogations about society, and the nobles or nobility address this. And in this 1869 text, Sumner goes deep into identifying the American social system that was predicated on the principles of tensions, animosity between two groups. And in this, of course, it's white and black, but also Sumner deploys the yellow, the Chinese, into this framework. So he really brings up kind of breaking the dichotomy of white and black, the dualisms, and intervenes through the yellow race, as he calls. Now, Sumner is very much devoted to understanding American slavery, but for him to understand the actualities of American slavery, what did American slavery produce? And Sumner argues it produced caste system. And the way it produced caste system, although he acknowledges in lecture that caste system is default system of a Hindu order, and very much in an educated tone provides all the distinctions, talks about Brahmins, talks about Kshatriya, talks about the Baniyas, and talks about the Sudra, but also talks about untouchables. Now, in a prominent frameworks of that time, untouchables were not really part of a canonical discussions. Sumner also pays attention to what he calls pariahs. Pariahs, it's a Tamilian word which refers to the outcast or the untouchable caste. Now, in this frame, his lecture, A Question of Caste, Sumner is trying to amplify the narrative of caste, not necessarily limited to the ideology of Hindu order, but he is also concerned about the social phenomenon. How are these distinctive realities existing in other parts of the world? And I quote him, bear with me, it's slightly longer paragraph, but really covers what I'm trying to address here. He says this institution, as in caste institution, is essentially barbarous and therefore appears in barbarous ages. And he's referring to, of course, the barbarous age, or in countries not yet relieved from the early incubus. It flourished side by side with the sculptured bulls and cuneiform characters of Assyria, side by side with pyramids and hieroglyphs of Egypt. It showed itself under the ambitious sway of Persia, and even in much praised Cyclopean era of Attica. In all these countries, caste was organized, differing somewhat in divisions, but hereditary in character. Now, hereditary character is what is concerning Sumner's hypothesis to understand caste in its larger sea. He continues, and the same phenomena of hereditary character arrested the attention of the conquering Spaniards in Peru. So he's also going into Latin America. The system had two distinct elements. First, separation with rank and privilege, or their opposite, which means you had no rank or privilege, with degradation and disability. And second, descent, from father to son, so that it was perpetual separation from generation to generation. Now, there are three striking characters that he uplifts, or let's say metaphors of caste. One is hereditary. Second is, of course, the idea of hierarchy, which is a separation, but also separation equal, but separation in segregation. And third is descent based. Now, these three are the fundamental characteristics of how we describe caste even in today's time. Now, descent is, of course, the bloodline which continues to animate. So caste is prevalent around this time. Now, Sumner saw caste as an hereditary ranking social system which is unsuitable to republicanism. He's of course talking about republicanism of his own country, and he goes on to say that if this abhorrent practice, which he very much refers to barbarous ages, or the countries, even they have their glorious past, have hold on to this barbarity. He said, if this abhorrent practice is continued in America, it will put to shame an entire humanity. And so his arguments are not just limited to the one phrase of operation, but it's talking about the totality. So even though he says, and this is him talking, there is a difference between Indian Brahmin and American white. Of course, he's not making a simple analogies. Brahmins are whites. No, he said there are differences. But what a peculiarity remains in this two is that both of them were united with their condition of hereditary rank and privilege. So this theory of hereditary rank and privilege comes back again and again. And that's why he says we have to look at society through a wider lens of how caste operates in its governmentality. Of course, governmentality is a Foucauldian idea, but how this then, he's not limiting it to personal relationships, but he's going much deeper into how politics and sociology of caste is inbred into the veins of American society. And he goes, and I quote him, if caste operated in republic, which is born of yesterday, unquote, was now the question of superiority that was inducted into, quote, science, government, or religion. And I think this is basically, I think, a statement of a 19th century American social science, which literally is passing or talking or translating the viciousness of caste that existed in the societies. Now departing Sumner, about 1873, I'm of course going to dance through the two land mass, US and as well as India. 1873, Phule, who himself is belonged to a Shudra caste, devised his theory of Aryan migration, or Aryan, what he called invasion. He talked about Brahmins as being the Eurasians who came from Persia, but also had the blood of the Caucasus, who came, colonized us, attacked us, defeated us, and then eventually made us or broke us into several pieces, which is several caste and subcaste, and called as Shudras or Ati Shudras. And here Phule brings in a dynamic understanding of how caste it not only necessitates the organizing principle of society, but also it is degradation and civilizing colonization of society. And then the whole modus operandi when he's writing his text is called as slavery. He calls his slavery almost in conversation, not in almost, it is in conversation with the American abolitionist as well as the slave, or what he called the problem of the black people in America. He of course devoted slavery to the good people of America, which basically were abolitionists, and he was hoping that same will be derived as an inspiration from his fellow countrymen. Now, when Phule is doing this analysis, he's bringing in two perspectives. One is he's talking about the genocide of invaders on the natives. This is very much in tune with how Native Americans in America were exterminated. I think Phule uses the word mass extermination to refer to how there was a generational genocide that took place here, and nobody's accounting it. And when he's making this case, he's appealing to the British that you owe a responsibility. Now that you have abolished slavery, and you did it under your leadership, you have more responsibility towards us in India to abolish this caste system. So it's written very much of liturgical hermeneutics of coloniality in context of transnational solidarity and framing of the mobility. Now, for Phule, the indigenous category, which is Mool Nivasi, translated into Hindi as original inhabitants, is very central to describing India's history, but also India's social structure. He read closely the Hindu canon, but also those approaches of Aryan invasion were really countered, and there was a lot of debate. But now we have archaeological as well as genetic and hermeneutic readings of Hindu text, which kind of validate that. Now, slightly into that phase, around 1888, Catherine Impey, a Quaker woman in England, in Somerset, publishes a journal very much inspired by Booker T. Washington's Southern Letters, called Anti-Caste. But it's not a journal about caste, it's a journal about race. It is Britain's first journal that talks about racial or racism in its essence. And of course, it publishes a lot of letters. This woman, Catherine Impey, is literally one who is actually taking head on the issues of how racism operates, not only within the American context, but also in the colonies. Ida B. Wells, when she visits UK, she's hosted by Catherine Impey. Two people to read on this is, one is of course Catherine, I'm missing a last name, Bresse, who's written on her a biography of her, and another is Demetrius Udall, who's at Wesleyan, who's also done significant archival research on an anti-caste. Now her interest not being caste, she followed the interpreters of India's society, which are mostly Brahmins. So Brahmins' view that merited a caste based on birth, Catherine Impey had no problem agreeing to that. Now that's a highly problematic, if you will, solution or even approach to addressing this question. Nevertheless, an anti-caste, because the journal itself was called Anti-Caste, and we can see how caste still gets to address the issue of racism, while the existence of race as well as caste is existing almost in simultaneous. And then, of course, the grand old man, Du Bois, in Cambridge, at Harvard, studies, writing his own tome, but doesn't really work with his thesis, and writes and publishes his opus, probably the most famous text of a scholar from that era, The Souls of Black Folk, which remains influential even now. In that, Du Bois still wrestles with the idea of color caste. Du Bois's intervention of color caste doesn't fade away by Souls of Black Folk. He constantly invokes color caste. He's constantly bringing the caste dynamics into other texts. Eventually, also in Darkwater, in his own memoir or biography, he talks about it. But also other scientific texts he produces, where he is deploying color-caste theory, which very interestingly doesn't use race-caste. So the color aspect has a history that literally precedes Du Bois, but also kind of follows on Du Bois's term, where Lala Lajpat Rai, an Indian nationalist who visits America and ends up writing about his travelogue of visiting India. He himself, a high caste Hindu, befriends Du Bois. Du Bois's favorite book, The Dark Princess, is in conversation. I mean, he writes about this Indian prince, and you can see how much Du Bois is influenced with the Indian thought or what exists in India, and the novel, of course, remains. Du Bois says that is one of his favorite books that he wrote in his life. When the book is written, he sends to Rai for his comment. So we can see, and they of course lecture together, and we know the divide, the disagreements between Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. Rai, when he is in the north, hangs out with Du Bois. When he's in the south, hangs out with Booker T. Washington. Of course, trying to understand the color system. And Rai, almost in a mild defense of caste system, disagrees with caste existing in America. He says caste is uniquely Hindu, and it has to be a Hindu problem. He acknowledges himself as being high caste Hindu, but then really his observations are also mired by his own upper caste Hindu upbringing. And so that's why in this in his book, which is called the United States of America, colon, a Hindu's Impression and Study, 1916. In that book, Rai talks about caste as being a feature of Hindu India, whereas color as being a feature of Christian America. So the Hindu and Christianity are considered side by side in this frame. And Sumner, way back in 1869, had talked about the biblical notion of Noah and Ham, the son of Noah, and how that was utilized not only by the colonizers to justify slavery, but also in Poland. He gives example where the nobles, whoever they were, the serfs of Poles, were also declared as Hams. So very much kind of decolorizing the whole idea of how Noah and Ham, the Ham and the experience of blackness as opposed to also the whiteness, who are also declared as the son or the Hams or the slave races, if you will. And in this parlance, color, then of course we can see how Lala Lajpat Rai takes this and departs. Now, almost in 1930s, just to name drop few, because the time is running out, few literature for your to kind of development of this Dalit-Black Archive is then in 1937, John Dollard, who is actually a Yale sociologist, spends 5 months in South. He calls the town Southern Town. It's given fictional name, but the book is titled Caste and Class in a Southern Town. He of course researched the communities, but also he was very interested in the psychology of caste, as to how much of an emotional intake of caste really penetrated into society. And of course, that cognitive aspect of caste was very important to also understand, as to how superiority really functioned when when the person other was declaring one superior and other one was forced to accept as inferior, and how this tension took place. In the same year, Lloyd Garner, the Harvard-educated, famous social scientist, but also Alison Davis, one of the heroes, of course, of Isabel Wilkerson's book, her inspiration. Alison Davis, an African-American sociologist who also does the study. They both publish a paper, a comparative study of American caste. and in that, they talk about caste existing everywhere. But here, there were three important ingredients, if you will, of caste they identify. One is endogamy, second is immobility, and of course, third is the distribution of resources or non-distribution of resources. Just hold on to these three, as we were talking earlier. For Sumner, it was hereditary descent that really played well into this. Here, what we see is immobility, which is very much part of that, but also endogamy is essential. But in addition to endogamy, they're also talking about the unequal distribution of resources. However, one important thing that Garner does is he distinguishes caste and class early on. He writes an article way early in 1936, of course, a year ago. It's called American Caste and Caste. And in that, he says, very much in tune with Ambedkar by now, because Ambedkar is a total absent, a Columbia-educated, himself a Dalit scholar who has written one of the earliest authoritative texts way back in 1916. He's not really in focus of these debates, even though the anthropology he studied was at Columbia under the influence of Alexander Goldenweiser, which was of course Boas's influence, and the whole anthropology is taking place. But even in this distinction, what we have even debate today, Gardner says in class, you have a mobility. You can become rich. You can move around. But there are certain things in caste you can't do. Is you can't marry. Intermarriage is prohibited. You can't reproduce within that. It's not prohibited. And there is no mobility. You can't really change the status. And so there was a pushback on that. And then obviously then the later Buell Gallagher, who becomes the president of City College of New York, but also in Alabama, he becomes the president of Talladega College. Probably that pronunciation is right. He also is education, I think, official, who publishes the book American Caste and the Negro College in 1937, which of course takes all the earlier theories of caste and tries to understand how caste functions. Allison Davis then produces a magisterial account with other colleagues, especially influenced by Lloyd Garner, and here it's very interesting. Allison Davis's, him and his partner Davis and Davis, along with two Gardners, Burleigh Gardner and Mary Gardner, white and black couple, go to Mississippi rural town, live in white and black quarters, study there for 2 years, and after 2 years produce a magisterial account of Deep South, which is where a very scientific deep down study of how caste system operates. And they also see the quote unquote sexual gains, as they call it, and a person with a dominant caste, which is white person, has access to not the female body politic. The same is not given to the black person or the lower caste, or they call it subordinate caste people. But not only this, but the theme of sexual control departs or extends further to really develop a new theory of how Southern politics was defined strictly according to caste codes, because violation of caste codes invited lynching. And that was the function, or that was the highlight of a Jim Crow era, where Jim Crow itself was a caste system, separate but equal. And I think this kind of understanding of separate but equal was very much exercised and practiced within the Indian example of caste system. One decade gets very complicated, 1940s. Oliver Cox, a Trinidadian, refutes a Marxist scholar, structuralist. He says, you guys are wrong. It is a racism. It has to do with class. It has nothing to do with caste. You are misplacing the understanding of caste. You guys have no idea what you are talking about. And of course, Oliver Cox has not gotten access to primary, let alone second. He's mostly relying on secondary and tertiary resources, but he's reading very sharp. He's reading Hindu text. He's reading Manu Smriti, the Bible of caste system, if you will, and he's drawing an analogy from that. But he's so misplaced and he's misinformed that he even says in a letter refuting Gerald Berryman, who he's arguing against. Gerald Berryman spends time in Srikanda, North India, who does the research and says and reports about how caste is almost similar, because Gerald Berryman also worked in Alabama. He had experience of experiencing the Jim Crow Alabama, and also looking at the caste India, makes a comparison. There is a fight between two. I call them Cox and Berryman Chicago diaries. Both are Chicago educated, and you know, Chicago sociology was had a very much an arrogant attitude towards each other, let alone others as well. And so this kind of created a American Journal of Sociology editor had to literally get both of them. I mean, both of them were replying to each other in an academic sense, of course. And Oliver Cox, of course, does excellent analysis, but says there was no social protest. There was no movement of the quote unquote lower caste against this. Highly misinformed. 70 years into this, there was anti-caste movement existing. And all of this happened. Dalit-Black Archive was created without Dalits being part of it. And I think that is the highlight of my lecture, that even though there was an existential a prospect of describing caste, there was a respectability politics of understanding caste. Had any of the scholars even managed to read, if not few, couple books written by Dalits themselves or their experiences, or taken account of that, then it would have become a much nuanced, much progressive debate. And for me to come into this space is try to correct that. The white people, as well as the only two black people who were here, but majority were white dudes. And of course, their understanding was in a way framed to how they also located, because some of them were not into the class. Even though they belonged to a class, they were still not approaching, because American immigration story of white people, white people especially, gets a favorable response, and in that attitude, it never cemented. Ambedkar actually had written in 1916 the first text that zeroed in of caste being hereditary but also endogamy, was written by Ambedkar. These people were fighting over that, while Ambedkar had already proven in his classic Caste in India, a paper eventually published, which in Indian Antiquary Journal, which uplifted the phenomenon of surplus women, how women, and you can see the research of American South, especially Deep South by Davis and Gardner's, as well as Lloyd and Alison Davis, John Dollar talked about the sexuality of it, the sexual intensity of it. Ambedkar way early had done that. So what happens is, when we miss and orientalize our understanding of caste, it create a huge gap. That is what happened post civil rights movement, when Dalit Panthers were created. The attraction of race became very fundamental. Caste somehow was submerged, and that obfuscation of rich story, rich archive, that although talked about, it was never received by the Black American tradition. Partly, I think one reason is language, because these people were writing in regional languages, Marathi, Tamil, Telugu, Gujarati, Hindi. These were the major canons that were deployed, but translation was always an option. That was never meant. So Black Panthers never knew Dalit Panthers existed, while Dalit Panthers were creating their rebellious struggle, of course, on their indigeneity, but also drawing inspiration from how the Black Panthers are protesting. In 21st century, when I come on the stage, I see discrepancies. And that's why what I try to do is to shatter the Brahminical supremacy, which really operates as a person of color, as a subordinated category, yet benefits out of the oppression of Black and brown folks, is where this Brahminical 21st century project needs further interrogation. And it is here what I do is I redeploy the canon of 120-year-old theories that existed in America to not only legitimize the struggle of Dalit people, but delegitimize the profligacies of caste beneficiaries who benefit oppressing Dalits, while at the same time draw enormous tax cuts in Trump's or Biden's or Obama's America. It is in this spirit, I think, we started new movements. And in this, my Black is not confined to American Black. The Black as a wider category, Du Boisian framework of color line, but also Stu Biko's intervention of Black not just being a melanin, but a projection against oppression. And it is in that spirit we are concerned with the condition of Black people in the UK. We are concerned with the condition of Black people in Africa as a larger continent, but also Black as a category of protest and revolution. And with those Black and hyphenated Dalit solidarity has to exist. And for that, we started Dalit and Black Lives Matter movement, mostly belonging in Boston, trying to now expropriate it to other parts. Work is going on with indigenous people in Australia, refugees in Europe, as well as comrades in Africa, but also UK remains more important. Would like to uplift the work as well as the leadership of sibling Dr. Nathaniel, with whom we also collaborated, connecting the trinity of Black British, Black American, and Indian Dalit kind of solidarity, started Dalit and Black Power movement. And I think the archives have been inaugurated. Eventually, over the years, or maybe a decade, we will have more inventories to tap into. And I think maybe call me or talk to me after a few years or maybe a decade, and we'll have a more interesting dialogue on how we created this archives of people whose stories are never written, whose birth certificates we don't know, and whose original identity is yet to be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suraj. I'm going to turn to the questions. I will read them from the chat, and for the most part in the order in which they were entered. Generally, though, there are a couple of requests for the list of books that you referenced. It would be wonderful maybe if you could share that with us at some point. I know Neha has been putting a few of them into the chat, but I think there are probably some others that we missed. And then just a quick comment. I think your talk and your work, among others, really shows the importance of understanding history, including intellectual history. And as a policy school, I think we sometimes we tend to overlook the importance of history and think it's not very interesting. But I don't think we can have an understanding of what's happening today without a really deep understanding of history. So thank you for bringing that perspective. So let me turn to the first question by John Mark Gladstone. He asks, what do you see to be the negative effects of caste in the US and around the world, and what can be done to address the negative effects? A very simple question.
And I think it's longer explanatory question because one cannot escape that. And I think John, it is right. I think John, my concern remains the same as you. I think we need to square back and revisit how the biologism of race is still reproduced amidst us. Du Bois refuted that in his study of Philadelphia. uh, you know, but I think caste as a structural reality, as a fixed, immobile system, it really is everywhere else for the people who are unable to move out of that. And but not only that, going back to Sumner, it's also, excuse me, about superiority. It's also about getting or warranting yourself a unaccounted privilege and status. And in a society, dignity, it really has to be bargained for us and our own self existence. And I think that non-accounting of privilege, but also being uncharitable with dignity, is what is existing in rest of the world. And I think, in addition to the race-based analogy, we really need to understand how caste exists within that, because it is about the immobility of classes. That's what Ambedkar talks. That's what also Lloyd Garner talks about, which is the intra-class distinctions or intra-class unmarriageability, or reproduction in this case. And I think to address that, we really need to acknowledge the existence of caste not just as a pittance, or a sad moment for the people who are victims of caste, but also the huge oppression people who benefit out of caste bring to other countries in the world. And I think you can see that if you're not vigilant now. We are especially talking to the governments where there are majority dominant caste Hindu diaspora. If you don't address this now, their practice of 3 millennia is going to be translated into your own society. Don't think that you have laws and you have a liberal structure. Your liberal structure is itself going to create a problem because of its acceptance. And Bal Murali Natarajan in this case talks about culture as caste, and how here the culture of Hindus, or even Indian Muslims, South Asian Muslims, or Christians is actually de facto retaining your caste structure. But due to a liberal framework, we celebrate it as a celebration of a Hindu or a diversity, while under the diversity, smuggling of vicious casteness takes place. We don't pay attention to that. And I think to tame the Christian guilt is usually an argument when a white person makes, especially in this context. It's targeted as an Orientalist argument. And even if a Dalit makes, a Dalit is also called an Orientalist. So it really is and there are defenders of caste system. And you go and talk today, and I challenge all of you to any Hindu, go to any temple and talk to them about caste. Write their responses of first 10 minutes and come back and analyze how caste has been intimate to your essence. So I think we need to start engaging with that question, because believe it or not, Kamala Harris is the white president. We celebrate her, but also her half heritage of being a Brahmin kind of complicates the whole phenomena of how the solidarity has to be developed, especially in the context when her own people, Brahmins, continue to oppress and commit atrocities upon the non-Brahmin people, mostly Dalits in the country.
Thank you. Well, that's in a way the next question. You've already provided a segue into the next question by Juval Stefan, which is the Tamil Bible translates tribe as jati. Is this an attempt by Indian Christians to justify caste, or is it Indians viewing the biblical times through the caste system?
Well, I wouldn't have much knowledge on that, unfortunately, because I know very little of Tamil, experience. So maybe I will have to go and study more on the Tamilian part. Unfortunately, I might have not a response to that.
Okay, thank you. Next one from an anonymous attendee. Ambedkar is talked about as the single central figure to mass caste freedoms, something the racial civil rights movement in the USA has no equivalent. Is that true? If so, how has that impacted the respective movements?
That's true. I mean, it has been, because Ambedkar almost covers larger space. Kevin Brown, Professor Kevin Brown, distinguished law professor, Indiana, he says he's a mixture of Du Bois, MLK, and Martin Luther King Jr. And in a way, Ambedkar becomes that not only because he deals with the modern motifs, but he can also talk to both constituencies. He can talk to the people belonging to his own caste, but also not belonging to his caste. He's able to convey. But another important reference he brings is, he is educated in both the high tower or ivory towers, Columbia as well as LSE has a, so he is well versed. You cannot quote unquote bullshit him. He will deal with you, and that's why I think, and he is not apologetic about his demands, right? Other like Gandhi and other people are who really play a passive role in justifying caste, almost like other caste Hindus, and their project of especially the foreign Hindus, it's 100-year-old project. It's not new. Is always to present a soft image of Hindu identity, which is we are all of these stereotypes that have been created that were not necessarily created by them. It was supported by the Brahmins who are intermediates, and that's why when I critique also these people, especially in America, Cox and others, it is who are their informants, like whose book are they reading, who is reporting to them. I mean, there is something, and of course in citations you will see couple literatures, of course, produced by Brahmin scholars. But there is more to that. As you all know, when we write, we just don't write what is there. We also do our own investigations. And so I am also kind of concerned about what is written or what is written during the newspapers. And so the part of this book project that I'm trying to develop is also looking at how caste function in the Black literary world, but also in the newspapers and other spaces. So that's so work is going on for 4 years, and publisher is unhappy because I have not turned in my draft, but it's okay.
Thank you. I'm going to skip this as a question, but I'm going to flag it. Another anonymous attendee asked if you could suggest a few influential, interesting books written by Dalits in India other than Ambedkar, but maybe we'll leave that for offline. So let me provide you a question by Padmini Barua. Thank you a lot for this. I have a question. Could you please speak to the role of Dalit feminism and queer movements within the global movement, as well as in your archive project?
Oh, hi, excellent. Padmini has asked an important question. I think that space, first, before I go, I mean, I have already written about the books to be read for a magazine. I'm just being lazy to go through the edits, but once it is out, you will know. So purpose of that question was, yeah, I've written about it. So very soon you will get, hopefully. When we talk about the politics of sexuality or the control of sex as well as reproduction, it is actually decentering the foothold of, in a way, male spacing. And I think within the Dalit feminist, at least I, on my level, personal level, in India, try to create a conversation, facilitate the Dalit and Black women's kind of, solidarity to actually achieve, Dalit, non-female and Black is still not achieved. And so, Bangalore, some of my colleagues who probably are here on the call had visited Bangalore, and one of our aims was to kind of bring together all of this kind of spaces to do. And within the queer movement, I think that work is actually already taking place. Uh, I just don't have more up-to-date knowledge on that, because there are some of the projects that are already kind of, are taking in the form of not only academic engagements, but also how it is going to kind of report on that. So when I create this archive, it is not to exclude anybody. It's inclusive of all of this. And of course, a politics of caste cannot build without having a sensibility as well as a powerful intake of the queer movements, but also the movements led by Dalit females, or Dalit feminist, yeah, and many will argue, and especially there's a debate going on, Dalit womanist movement. So to do that, the work has to simultaneously function. And I think some quarters of them are already doing that. And so I'll let them do it. Once you are ready, we can then, develop on intellectualizing or perhaps providing whatever support we can in that space.
Great, thank you. The next question is quite similar, so I'm going to skip that one and go to, it keeps moving, to AAK, who asks, would you also consider the necessity of a permanent underclass for the success of liberal capitalist democracies in reproducing the inequalities we face in day-to-day lives, and as a cyclical perpetuation with no end in sight? I think there's a question embedded in there about maybe what can be done.
Right. I think, that's why that's why I'm critical of this liberal capitalist framework that really provides a breeding ground for any form of, quote unquote traditional hierarchies to function without really creating any challenge to that. And also the benefit of less liberal capital democracy is that there is a space of dissent as well. And so that's why, especially in America, we can see such kind of movement. Also in the UK, there is an anti-caste legislation kind of taking place. There's been conversation happening, but that has not happened to the level of policy change, but also not a mass movement. And I think that's been my concern in this, which is, how do I then utilize what do I have, at the same time offering a structural critique to that, right? Liberal capitalist framework remains, they offer a certain occasion, they frustrate you, they delay you, but hey, it's better than Saddam Hussein's Iraq, where you couldn't even talk about it, right? So there are various ways I think one can, or I would try to make a intervention into that. But I think this is a project that needs to be criticized, but also at the same time remain attentive to the facts that whatever we can draw, but simultaneously stay committed to the grassroots radical movements who are basically, and I think one of the things I want to do in long term is to kind of educate people across both the spectrums and wider spectrums about each other's. So once that education happens, maybe the next generation will be able to then build on this archive. So when you ask what's the archive, it's for next generation to kind of confidently take on some of this and take it further.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Mitesh, and it just disappeared. Oh, here we go. He or she says, there is some sense of acknowledgement of being an oppressor as seen in whites, but it's not the same in the case of castes in India. What can be done to bring acknowledgement in caste Hindus?
Just call them oppressor or criminal castes. Just don't call them upper castes. Call them for what it is. I think we have developed vocabularies and also developed justifications. Today, a Dalit rape on a Dalit murder, you will see people defending it. It's an obnoxious. Ambedkar called the Hindus are the sick people of India, and I think that's what he was saying. We had a Dalit man who had touched the food just yesterday, and he was beaten to death. And now there are whole aspersions created, but the death is not condemned, but people defending the act of death or creating a scenario. Oh, he was trying to molest a girl, that's why he was killed. I mean, so these are always narratives. A Dalit woman and a Dalit male dignity, even in death, doesn't remain. And so what you should do is the society is creating criminals. Parents, when they give birth and when they teach their children about upper and lower, they are creating criminals of caste society. And these criminals operate to defend and to protect their caste privileges so they can continue to harass and oppress other caste children. And in this case, Mitesh, what we should do is we should just put an accountability on the shoulders of the people, even though they are not directly involved. When we say white supremacy, we just say it. We don't add qualifiers to that because we know the white supremacists need to be told. And if there is a white person who carries that supremacist values, need to be cognizant of that. Similarly, when we accuse people of patriarchy, especially to the male identifying people, it is meant for the certain patriarchal tendencies that male might carry. So I think we should not be defensive to call out the criminal. Criminal is criminal. So the criminal castes, I call them criminal castes because there is no other effective way to address this criminals.
Okay, thanks. I think the next question is in some ways related, but kind of flipping it a little bit, and that is from Mohit Saini, which is, what is the role of non-Dalit people in India to make the society more inclusive and just for Dalits?
I like Mohit's question, and Mohit, thank you for asking. I think that question demands that Mohit works with Saini caste people, his own caste people, first to educate them about how vicious caste system is and how much it is harassing other people. There is no, if you exist in a caste society as an upper caste or as a dominant caste, you are there with an unequal relativity, which means your existence is creating non-livable conditions for others. There is no other way around. It's a two-pole condition. And I think it is in this movie, I think the non-Dalits need to educate themselves more and be more compassionate, more caring. I think these are the basic principles our parents teach us. We usually lose it out to bigotry and fictitious hatred that just emasculates us. And I think it is about responsibility, especially on you, Mohit, that you not only educate yourself, but congregate with your fellow caste people in a self-liberatory mode of engagement. You fight against caste so that you can be liberated. If you are attached in caste, you are being attacked in caste by your own kinds. And many people don't understand. When we see your hand is cut and you see somebody's leg is broken, you feel yourself better because your leg is at least not broken. Your hand is cut, that's fine, you can apply. But still, you are the victim. You don't see it as such. We always compare our miseries with other people's miseries. I think we should not do that. We should always develop a drop of blood is equivalent to buckets of blood, if you will. It has to fight on that level.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one more. So I'm actually gonna just choose one of the remaining questions that I think is especially provocative. It comes from Four Rivers, who says, deploying Blackness as a symbol of resistance and anti-imperialism has the danger of decentering Black people and the appreciation that Black is indeed a melanated condition of being beyond a social construct. Biko's work stands to be critiqued and has been hugely misconstructed by white liberal interests. As a South African woman living in a Black body, how might you respond to this real concern?
This is Four Rivers has really asked an important question. I think this is the question I've been also wrestling with. I think the condition of Blackness in this case, and I'm well aware of Biko's critiques, and I am also sensitive to those critiques. So let it not be that I'm totally buying into that. But what remains fundamental in this case is the idea of how Biko develops consciousness. Of course, Biko is coming late in the life, quote unquote, late in the life of post-imperial or at least post-colonial space, but still developing a novel identity when there are other archives present for him to dip into, especially in the rest of Africa, but also the liberation theology of Black America. And I think I think the appreciation is within the melanin context of being a black person as within the racial, quote unquote, racial construct, I think could also help if you look at how class and caste interprets in this condition. I think this is helpful for us also to depart from the native identities of supremacy. For example, in Nigeria, they have a caste system. They have their own outcast, the Osu and Ohu in Igbo land. And it's classic Hindu response that you will get in India, that you get with the Nigerian dominant caste people. Most of them I meet in, of course, at Harvard, no other place to meet, is when you highlight that, it's almost like shrugging yourself away from that. I don't belong to that. Like, oh, that's old sister. Oh yeah, they are them people. So here's my concern as to how do I then address to that black body, which also produces a certain caste system. The teleology of that caste system might not be the same, and nobody's arguing it's the same, but the existence of a segmented hierarchy which degrades and depreciates the quality of life and also gives identity of lowliest, low born, by the very virtue of being born into an or lower caste, quote unquote, lower caste woman's womb, is itself, it's itself a very unsettling for personally for me. And that's why we started to communicate with the people, not necessarily with the elite, quote unquote, elite black people of Africa, but the people who are oppressed by their low caste status. Because how do you then deploy the canon of blackness when the lower caste or subordinated caste exist within the melanin of blackness? And I think that's been like a soul searching moment. Similarly, we see that in Senegal. I mean, I wrote a paper. It's under review, which is called Global Caste. It's the global caste, which basically uplifts this narrative, and within the dynamics of where we find class within the caste context, the race is not really operating in its sense, because we know race was really a fictional, and race, how it was described, was basically in opposition to whiteness in its development. Iberian examples mostly, that's how racial, the race synonym or the race dictionary is taken from that Iberian archive, which we use today. Not that race was not used in the Greek or Roman times, or also Varna itself means race in India, or also not race, color. But in this context, how do we then complicate the subordinate status of the people who are not necessarily always in class? Now, Ohu and Osu are not poor people, especially Osu people. If class is an argument, no. They have, like, the Osu I'm speaking to, her parents are a lawyer, one is a businessman, and of course they have created their own economy, children are studying in foreign country. So the class argument is again not like, what do you make of that? And then when you go into the history, there is a history that they were defeated and some of them were sacrificed to the gods. So there is something more sinister to making someone lower. And when you become lower, what you do is you become part of a subordinated caste where you don't have escape. Now, once you are Osu, you're Osu. That's it. Once you get into the shrine, of course. And here, untouchability also, Osu, the way Osu see it as, oh, we are untouchable, which means we are special people. They can't, and I think that kind of subversion of that also takes place. But I think further investigation needs to be done also within the Creole societies that we have within the littorals, but other parts of the indenture labor societies, where there is a kind of new hybrid mix kind of coming out, and same happens in other parts. So I think caste as a theoretical entry point, if we are able to deploy, probably there is something more we can do to service, I think, to the poor and oppressed people across the world.
Well, thank you so much, Suraj. That was really, really engaging and interesting. Thanks to everyone who was able to attend for your wonderful questions. I'm really sorry we didn't get to all of them. It's obviously this very rich and important and complicated topic. So I just want to give my very warm thanks to Suraj, and I hope we can keep in touch, and we'll all keep reading your work, and look forward to your future publications, which I'm sure will be very enlightening, including the one with the bibliography of other Dalit scholars and authors. So with that, we are going to close this webinar. I wish everyone well, stay safe, stay healthy, and thanks to you all. Take care.
Everybody.